Frank, when did you say that you had your vaccination? Yesterday?
No, wife had hers today at St James's,
Okay.
and I was 10 days ago at Kingston.
Ah.
I was going to say Kingston Cemetery, but it's not, is it? It's Kingston Crescent.
Yeah.
But it's not far to go.
Yeah, that's true. Anna, are we all right now? Oh, she's on mute now.
That's a long time ago, Frank.
What, 10 days?
Yeah.
I think when you've been locked up for as long as we have, 10 days is nothing.
Yeah. Were you all right, Frank? Did you have any reaction or anything?
None at all.
Yeah.
Didn't even feel it. Just shows
Yeah.
how thick I am. Yeah. He said, you can go now. I had a man do me. That sounds good, doesn't it? I had a man do me, yeah.
Anna's speaking, but she's on mute.
I think she's talking to Peter, who's probably helping remotely.
Is she? All right.
Sorry, it is live now.
Oh, now it's live. Okay, thank you. Okay, good afternoon and welcome to the virtual meeting of the Education Advisory Board. And apologies if you've been waiting for us to start. We have had technical problems. So I'm Councillor Susie Horton and I'll be chairing the meeting today. We are meeting virtually in response to the limitations placed on governance by the COVID-19 pandemic. Until recently, the law stated that all members had to be present in the room to make formal decisions at meetings. However, the law was amended in response to the COVID-19 emergency and councils are able to hold public meetings virtually. This will be in accordance with the Local Authorities Coronavirus Flexibility of Local Authority Meetings Regs 2020 number 392. Members of the public are invited to view this meeting online. Those present are requested to keep their microphones on mute and to only turn them on when they are called to speak. This will limit the amount of background noise which can be disruptive, and members are requested to keep their cameras turned on at all time. Officers and presenters are requested to turn their cameras on only when they're presenting their reports or answering questions. Members and those who wish to speak should use the chat to write their name followed by RTS, request to speak. Please do not use the chat for anything else. And it says here, use the chat on the right-hand side of the screen, not the chat icon on the left. Oh, and I'd never found one on the left, so I guess we'll stick with that. Each time you speak, please say who you are so it's clear who is speaking. And I will look at that chat, and I think Anna will monitor it too. If there are technical difficulties, any more technical difficulties, I should say, we will endeavour to resolve these, and where necessary, we'll have a brief adjournment, but the meeting can proceed as long as we are quorum. So I'm just going to see who is here today, and I'll say names and people can introduce themselves and who they are. So I'll start with the councillors. Councillor Frank Jonas.
Councillor Frank Jonas, representing the Hillsey ward.
Welcome. Councillor Terry Norton.
Thank you, Susie. Councillor Terry Norton, and I'm present.
Welcome. And Councillor Jeanette Smith.
Councillor Jeanette Smith, present.
Welcome. And Councillor Judith Smythe.
Councillor Judith Smythe, present.
Welcome. So the other people I have on my list, I'll go down my list first, is Alison Jeffrey.
Good afternoon, Alison Jeffrey, Director of Children, Families and Education for the City Council.
Thank you, Alison. Mike Stoneman.
Yep. Good afternoon, Mike Stoneman. I'm Deputy Director Education.
Thanks, Mike. Debbie.
Good afternoon, Debbie Anderson, Head of School Improvement and Early Years.
Thank you, Debbie. And we have Sarah Christopher.
Hello, Sarah Christopher, Portsmouth Education Partnership and School Inclusion Manager.
Thank you, Sarah. And Rob?
Hello, I'm Rob Sanders. I'm Deputy Director of Education for Portsmouth Diocese.
Thank you, Rob. And have I got anyone else? I've got Anna.
Anna Martin, Democratic Services.
Have I left anyone else out? No. Welcome all. Okay, so we'll move on to the agenda now. First agenda item is apologies for absence. We've got Jeff Williams from the Anglican Diocese. And Anna, do we have any other apologies?
None that I'm aware of apart from Jeff.
Okay, so just as a point of clarification, I had Steve Lebetz on my list. Does anyone know if he's still on this, on the PEP? Is he still on the PEP, Mike?
Well, yeah. So just to come on there, so Steve has retired,
Yeah.
as you be aware, but he has agreed to stay on as the chair of the PEP only until the next meeting, which is going to be held in a week commencing 15th of March. What we're doing now is putting out an advert shortly to recruit an independent chair to ideally for the next 2 years. So hence the reason Steve's not here today, but he is going to just step in for one more time as the chair of the PEP Strategic Board. We did have a co-chair situation, but the other co-chair was Fiona Calderbank, who resigned from her post in December. So yeah, so they're all going.
So they're going. Hopefully it's nothing to do with the PEP, but I don't think it is.
No, I think the circumstances, yeah.
So he won't be coming to these meetings anymore, but the new one will. So it's
ideally, yeah. Once we got the new independent chair, then yes, they'll come to this meeting in the future. Yeah.
Okay, it's probably worth putting on record then, Anna, our thanks to Steve for his contributions to these meetings, as well as his role as co-chairing the PEP. Okay, so that's the apologies. Second one is declarations of interest. I'm the vice chair of Craneswater Junior School governing body, which I will say first, and then I'm going to go straight to Terry because he normally has one.
Yep, same one for me. I am employed at Mayfield School, albeit through an external agency.
And Jeanette?
My normal one, I'm a paid official for Unison for Hampshire branch. So anything comes up with in regards to Unison matters, then I'll have to withdraw. But there's nothing on the agenda that gives that. So,
thank you. And is that Debbie? You requested to speak.
Yes, I work for Ofsted as an Ofsted inspector at certain times, but I don't inspect in Portsmouth. And at the moment, all inspections are being carried out by HMIs.
Thank you, Debbie. Okay, I think we're done with that item then. So item 3 is the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 14th of October 2020. We need to ensure this is correct record of the meeting. Are there any comments about that? If you had a chance to read them? No. Okay, so I'll approve the minutes as correct record. And we'll move on to the first substantive item here, which is the Portsmouth Education Strategy 2020 to 2023 update on progress in year 1. So I'm going to hand over to Mike Stoneman now to present this report.
Okay, thank you, Susie. Just by way of an introduction, the way I intend to do this is I'm going to go through each of the 9 priorities within the Portsmouth Education Strategy and just picking out highlights for each priority. What I will do is at the end of those highlights is just pause and allow for questions against each of those priorities. And I will be asking Debbie and Sarah to contribute to this in terms of particular priorities that they are leading on or being involved with. So you won't just be hearing from me, you'll be pleased to know. So that's the way I'm going to manage it, if that's okay. So in terms of the purpose of the report, well then, as Susie said, this is about giving an update, a progress update in terms of the education strategy. We're in year 1 of the new 3-year strategy, which was published in September. So this is covering the autumn term and the first half of the spring term in terms of 2021. So we'll go through the 9 priorities. We'll start clearly with priority 1, which is around strong leadership and ambition at all levels to improve effectiveness and outcomes. And I'm going to, and sorry Debbie, I'm putting you on the spot here. If Debbie could just come in now and just pick out a few highlights, particularly in terms of the role of the board that oversees this work, and some of the work we're doing around benchmarking and looking to how we can improve and raise standards. So Debbie, do you want to just pick out a few highlights for me? Thank you.
Yes, of course. So as you may know, we changed from having a school improvement board that previously existed to a sort of repurposed school leadership and effectiveness board. It's taken a while to set up given the whole COVID situation, but we now have quite an extensive membership. And what we really want to do is gather the views of those partners around processes and best practice for what are the processes that schools use to set ambitious targets, what processes do they go through, who do they look at, how they establish that, and then the processes that are used to try to meet those targets. So benchmarking is looking at where do similar schools or families of schools achieve, and therefore should your school be achieving in line with that, exceeding that. So as I say, that's what we're trying to do. So the meeting that we've had recently, we were thrashing out some very specific questions that we wanted to ask of all schools, whether they're LA maintained or academies. And we've got as far as we're just about to publish a survey to gather those. I have had conversations with certain people in MATS as well, because this is about the contribution of all schools working together, so that we can establish some really best principles and some minimum expectations that we want to put in place from September 2021. Obviously now is not the time to be doing it. We can't reference previous assessments. We didn't have any last year. We won't have any this year. But it's definitely looking at moving forward with some robust processes.
Thanks, Debbie. So yes, that's one of the key priorities within that particular objective. So open to questions and discussion. Just to pause there. Any comments on that? If not, I will move swiftly on to the next priority. Okay, thank you. The next priority is around digital learning, and you won't be surprised to hear that this has been a key focus of our work in the first year. And as it says in the first bullet point there, never has there been a more important time in terms of remote education and digital learning being a real opportunity to make sure that we've got some of the best remote education that we can have. We were thinking about this before the pandemic came along, and it was something we felt could really sort of stimulate standards, and the pandemic, we've seized on that opportunity, and we've been providing some dedicated support to our schools to make sure that they all have remote education plans in place and they are being delivered as well as they can be. And part of that arrangement has been a deal with Thinking Schools Academy Trust, which is one of our sort of leading digital pioneers, and we've set up a contract with them, so they are providing dedicated support across the city, and we've sort of part funded a digital development officer to help with that. And in doing that, we've really moved schools on in terms of their remote education offer and the way they're applying digital technology. When we did a baseline survey back in the summer, it was clear that there was a lot of variability across our schools. Some schools had given this a lot of thought and were well advanced in their plans. Others were hardly past go. You know, they were still in the very early stages. But what we've seen is almost, I'd say transformational in terms of the work that our schools have done to put in place a strong remote education offer, but really applying digital technology in a number of ways to make sure that we've got that interactivity between teachers and pupils, which we know is so important, particularly when you've got a lockdown situation, let alone when they're self-isolating. And we've also enabled our schools to meet a range of deadlines which have been imposed by the Department for Education, including having plans in place by September 2020, making sure that schools can move immediately to remote education where pupils have to self-isolate, and also an expectation that plans for parents can be put on the school websites, and there was a deadline of the 25th of January for that. Now that has all been met by our schools with the help and support we've been able to provide. And just a bit about that support. So through the Digital Development Officer and through the help of TSAT, we've been putting on a variety of webinars, we've been putting out information, we've updated a dedicated page on the PEP website where we store all this information, and that's really been well received and well attended by our schools. So that's all been put in place to support remote education. And I think the other key aspect of our work, which is probably worth touching on, is around access to devices. So as well as the DFE initiative, which is obviously involved an allocation of devices across our schools, although apart from infant schools, they're not included. We've supplemented that with support for our primary schools through the Elementary Education Fund, a local trust fund, to provide digital devices for our primary schools. And we're now also, with Shaping Portsmouth, we just launched a digital donation scheme. And where we do have gaps, we're hoping we can fill those gaps through that particular initiative. So a lot of work on digital technology, and I'll pause there to take any questions around that priority.
Thanks, Mike. Jeanette, you put a request to speak first.
My question is centred around the access to IT and not just IT equipment, but also the web and how they get on sort of broadband and everything else. So do we know what the scale of the problem is in Portsmouth, and how many do not have access to both? And is there going to be any move on infants as well? Because that's just as important in year 6 as it is in year 7, 8 and 9.
Yeah. I mean, all schools have done surveys of their parents to find out, families to find out what the arrangements are, where they've got issues, particularly around not just devices, but as you say, in terms of access to the internet, and that includes also data. And so although I can't give you a citywide position because we haven't done a full-scale survey of that kind, what I can tell you is the schools are on top of this, and where they have identified gaps and they can't meet those gaps, then they're in dialogue with us. So I think we've got a pretty good handle on it. There's been a lot of support out there, either through the DFE or through our own local schemes that we've been able to offer. And I think overall we've got a pretty good handle. The one area which I know is weak is on the infant schools. So the DFE allocation has not included infant schools, which I think is really disappointing, and I think is short-sighted, because although, yes, it's up in the upper key stage groups that you really need that remote education off in terms of the digital learning side of things. Clearly you need it at key stage 1 and early years as well, and the schools are using it very successfully for those year groups. So we are having to step in to support those schools to ensure they don't have those barriers. We're not there yet because there are still some gaps, but as I say, we're looking to fill that with the digital donation scheme that we're setting up with Shaping Portsmouth. So I hope that answers most of your questions, Jeanette.
That's fine. Thanks ever so much. Thank you.
Terry.
Thank you, Susie. Yeah, Jeanette and I are on the same, singing from the same hymn sheet, I think. My question was around numbers. Can we confidently say then that where we've identified students that don't have access to the internet or technology, measures are being taken to get them in school so they still have access to that learning, or is that quite complicated to do? And then the second one for me, if you don't mind, Mike, piling them up, was around the access again. We know that certain networks, 3G, etc., are offering free data. We've had the 4G dongles that have gone out, but obviously not most of the big networks, O2, Vodafone, haven't signed up to that yet. Is there any news of them coming on board yet?
Not that I'm aware of, and I know some of the deals out there are not particularly attractive, actually. Some of it's more of a sales pitch, and when you look into what they're actually offering, it's not particularly helpful. So I'm not aware of any major move. In terms of that first point you made, Terry, about those children who are struggling to access at home, and it can be for a variety of reasons. It might not just be down to the devices, it might be due to the space limitations of where they're living. It could be that they're having to share devices across a larger family. Where we have situations like that, and it's clear that that is a barrier, then they are deemed as vulnerable children, and schools will be, wherever possible, offering a place within the school so they can access their learning there. Now, that's not to say that parents are all taking that offer up, but that is certainly being made available by the schools. They are doing everything they can to make sure that children have access to learning, whether it's at home or if offering a place in the school.
Rob, you have a question?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, no, I just had a question about homeschooling, actually, and whether there's been any support or provision available to families who've elected to homeschool in terms of IT and internet access. And I know that we've discussed this previously, and also given that, you know, various networks that exist for those families to meet and share education experiences together are obviously limited in this period as well. So I wonder whether there's any further monitoring or assessment that's been able to take place of children who aren't currently in school.
Well, in terms of those families that electively home educate, I mean, all we do, Rob, to be blunt about this, is we monitor that education, and we have to satisfy ourselves that suitable education is being provided. What we don't provide is any additional support, either through through IT, websites, resources, and so forth. We make it really clear to those parents that wish to electively home educate that they are taking on that burden. It's not something that we are going to actively support. I know other local authorities take a slightly different view, but that is the position in Portsmouth. So we absolutely do track and monitor, and we make sure that suitable education is being provided, but we don't provide any additional support to help with that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. I was just interested as to whether there was anything at all available. Okay.
Thank you, everyone. I think the only point that I would add to all of this is that this whole notion of digital divide is not going to go away just because young people go back to school, because we've seen such a step change in the way that we use digital in its broadest sense in education, and there are plenty of opportunities for actually using it as part of the day-to-day education that we will see in the future. But that divide will remain, and we need to keep an eye on that to make sure that whether it's the quality of devices or the access to the internet, etc., whatever it is, that we need to remain vigilant about that, and that is definitely going to be on the radar for the future. Okay, thank you, Mike.
Yeah.
Do you want to go on to
and I think just to finish off on priority 2, just to say that this isn't a sort of one hit. We are looking at a long-term strategy around digital learning. So through TSAT, we're planning to run an event probably in the summer to bring all this together. So we're ready for the next academic year, where we hope obviously some normality will return. And ideally, we'll have the full opening of schools and everybody will be in school. But what we now want to do is to build on what we've learned, build on that offer, and have something that's truly blended and integrated, where kids can do that learning at home as well as in school, supporting homework, etc. That's what we want to move to. So yeah, we're quite excited about the future, and we really want to build on what we've achieved in this year. Okay, priority 3 then, that's literacy, and I'm going to hand over in a moment to Debbie again just to talk a bit about this. But just in terms of background, this was a priority which we set out because of the issues around outcomes in literacy. When we had our last set of published validated data from 2019, what really hit us between the eyes was some of our literacy outcomes at Key Stage 2 in particular. And we decided we needed to make this a real focused piece of work, which is why we set it out as a single priority, and also set up a early literacy early language and literacy development group to spearhead this work. But I'll pass over to Debbie, who can give you some highlights from year 1 of the strategy.
So yes, I mean, setting up, I think, the early language and literacy development group has been a key piece of work, bearing in mind there's representation on that group right from early years, health visitors, speech and language therapists, through the primary sector, through to secondary, and even a representative from the University of Portsmouth. So you can see that it's being given a huge prioritisation and lots of partners involved. And also members of the library services and sort of museums and the cultural aspect as well. So from that work, 3 strands have come out. Certainly, we definitely want to review and relaunch the early years language plan on a page, which talks about really the commitment of different partners across the city to commit to what they can do to develop children's early language, because we know how vital that is. The second strand, as Mike suggested, is that we really need to improve reading across the city. So through a twinning project, I've managed to get 10 of our schools, our primary schools or junior schools, involved in a destination reader programme, which was designed successfully by Hackney Learning Trust. And that training has already taken place. 2 full days in January, which I think for schools to commit to that was fabulous, given the current context of where we are with members of staff training that. But it's built on very secure subject knowledge. It's built on very systematic programs of developing strands of reading, equipping teachers to be using the right language, to model, to scaffold, and to sequence learning all the way through. So hopefully that training is being implemented even through remote education, and we're keeping in contact with Hackney, who designed the programme, because they're doing updates all the time, adding resources. They did a lunchtime talk session the other day, which was attended by schools in Hackney and in other areas where they put out that training programme. And then the third strand is about literacy skills, particularly thinking about transition points. And that's being led by Becca Dean, who's involved in set up Pompey Pirates, and particularly thinking about vocabulary and high expectations of what vocabulary do we want children and young people to have at those transition points. So transition from early years into year R in school, thinking about year 2 to year 3, moving on to that key stage 2. And then from year 6 into year 7 and even beyond further up. So that's the piece of work that's being undertaken there. So that's moving forward, and those meetings of that group happen half-termly.
Thanks, Debbie. Okay, so any questions on the literacy priority? No? Okay, in which case I'll move on to priority 4, which is teacher recruitment and retention. And just to say that this has been a priority of the Portsmouth Education Partnership for some time, and continues to be. And although we've seen, in some ways, a sort of one of the benefits, I suppose, of the pandemic is that we have actually seen an increase in interest in teacher vacancies, and also our ITT providers, our initial teacher training providers, are all reporting fairly good numbers this year, which has been really pleasing. And I hope also that this has also been a result of the work we've been doing around the Teach Portsmouth campaign. So we are continuing with all of that work, and some of the highlights from this from year 1 has been the Teach Portsmouth newsletter, which was launched last term, as being published monthly, really professional newsletter, and the number of subscribers going on that just continues to rise. You know, it was just under 300 when we last looked. I think it's well over that figure now, and that's, you know, being really well received. We get positive feedback from our schools as well in terms of what we're doing around Teach Portsmouth. We've run a number of webinars, which again has had a lot of interest. We've got a third one coming up, which will be focusing on retention, in particular CPD and progression opportunities in teaching. The Teach Portsmouth awards event, which, as you know, in the past we've held in October. I forgot where do we hold it, Sarah? You have to remind me. It's the
Gaiety Bar.
Gaiety Bar, that's right. Yes, on the.
But it wasn't going to be this year.
No, so that and that's been very successful in the past. We obviously desperately would have liked to have done it this year, but obviously could not do that because of the pandemic. So we're going to do a virtual event which is now taking place on the 8th of July, and we've got a usual sort of set of awards in there, but including also a Portsmouth Community Award, and we've had over I think it's 80 nominations of 80 teachers for that particular one. So looking forward to that event on the 8th of July. Our annual teacher recruitment event is on hold, obviously because of the pandemic, and that will return to. Yeah, and that's probably it. All I can say in terms of Teach Portsmouth. It's just continue with the work we've been doing, and I think it's made a real difference. And we can't take our foot off this particular pedal, because you can be sure that once the pandemic is over and we're returning to some kind of normality, then we might see a dip in terms of that interest. We need to keep this pressure on to make sure that we are getting the best teachers coming into Portsmouth. So I'll pause there. Any questions on teacher recruitment and retention?
Councillor Norton.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Just out of interest, really, it's great news. I think that we're seeing the numbers go up. Are we noticing, out of interest, that there are people from other backgrounds coming into teaching? You know, those that may not currently be employed from other areas, and if so, if not really, are we reaching out to those to ensure that we get, make the most of some really good skills, I guess?
Yeah, and that we've been doing that over the last 3 years, reaching out to a whole variety of backgrounds to make sure that we're pulling in, as far and wide as possible. And yes, we've definitely seen that. And if you talk to the initial teacher training providers, they're seeing a sort of interesting range coming in. So absolutely, we've been doing that, and we are seeing that. Yeah.
I think that's it for questions, Mike.
Okay, right, let's move on then to priority 5, which is around infection control, health and safety. So yeah, I mean, this is an unusual one for an education strategy, but obviously absolutely critical in this pandemic to support our schools, to support attendance, to support engagement in remote education and so forth. So so the work we've been doing in year 1 has been very much around collaboration with our schools to help them minimise the risk of transmission in schools. That's partly been around information, and we've benefited from having an infection control group, which has been chaired by our Director of Public Health, Helen Atkinson, with really good support from my Head of Service, Alison Critchley. And our schools have really found that helpful in terms of how they've managed risk within their schools, managed local outbreak planning where they've had positive cases and having to self-isolate, and of course, more recently, managing the third lockdown. Supporting that, of course, this term has been a focus on testing. So we started with the lateral flow testing in our secondary schools, which has moved on to our primary schools and also our special schools. And we've also very recently been able to offer vaccinations to a small number of staff who are working with clinically vulnerable pupils. And that includes obviously a large number in our special schools, but it also includes our mainstream schools and a few education staff who are working with those groups as well. And that's all been done in the last few weeks with just a few more to go. So a really important priority and has made a real difference within the city. And is if you ask our schools, where we're really making a difference and helping, they will cite this time and time again, and they've really appreciated the involvement of our Director of Public Health. But again, happy to take any questions on that priority.
Anyone? Councillor Norton?
Yes, please, Mark. I've actually got 2 on this, really. So I do welcome the small number of staffs that have been vaccinated already. Now, look, of course, we can't force any families to consent to lateral flow testing, but are we doing all we can to ensure that levels of communication are consistent so that families do have access to this consent? Now, the reason I say this is there are obviously some who won't or haven't returned forms yet, and certainly of key worker school children at the moment, and it's obviously support staff that are in school at the moment. So I think there is a feeling around support staff not being able to be at home because they won't get paid if they're at home and therefore being at greater risk. Is there anything we can do to assure them that we really are chasing families to ensure that that we are offering lateral flow testing, it is being taken up, and therefore they have a sense of peace of mind, I guess, that they are being kept safe?
Okay, well, just a couple of things on there, Terry. And I think the first point just to make that in terms of the lateral flow testing, the majority of the testing is focusing on staff, not necessarily pupils. So in our secondary schools, pupils those that were coming in on site were tested, and that was all set up for them. But it's the focus on staff really, and that's been the case in our primary schools. It's been staff that we've been testing, and certainly for those pupils that are coming on site in secondary, then yes, they've been through that testing regime. And in fact, some of our secondary schools have continued with weekly testing for those pupils. Not all, but some certainly have. What we are now introducing is saliva testing through the University of Southampton, which is a particular offer for the Hampshire and Isle of Wight sub-region. And we've had 3 of our secondary schools already involved in that, and we've got 4 more now about to take part in that saliva testing programme. And that is weekly testing of both staff and pupils. And again, we are doing a lot of work to inform parents, ease their anxieties about this. It's a fairly simple test and an easy one to administer. And the feedback we've had from those schools that have participated so far has been really positive, really good engagement, good uptake, which is really pleasing to hear. And we hope that with the saliva testing programme, we can roll that out to all schools after half term, certainly all of our secondary schools and colleges, and then we move further out, subject to the capacity of our labs that have been set up to support this process. Looking ahead, when we see the reopening of schools and all children starting to come back, that could be a challenge in terms of the mass testing, which was originally proposed at the start of term, and we'll be gearing ourselves up for that and supporting our schools to do that also. I think that answers your question in a roundabout sort of way. I hope that does.
Yeah, no, I think it does. I mean, I do have some concerns around the rollout of mass testing. I mean, some of the reports I've seen have said that it would take 9 members of staff 3 hours to test 40 children. It just doesn't make sense. You know, if we're looking to test every child once a week. So I guess it's just confirming how confident we are that we can roll out mass lateral flow or saliva testing.
Yeah, I mean, we're waiting. You know, it'd be interesting to see what the DFE guidance is going to be around this when we get nearer to that point. I imagine they might backtrack on what they were originally proposing. And of course, if we do have saliva testing in place, then the question is, do we need lateral flow testing as well for our pupils? I mean, I would hope not, because it is, you know, we've got to think about the risk of transmission as well. And by having mass testing, that doesn't really help with that particular agenda. So we'll wait and see, Terry. I think there will be further advice on this, but we're certainly pushing the saliva testing route, and I hope that will provide a real solution going forward.
Thank you.
I
Okay,
think
so
Debbie wants to come
Debbie,
in and add to something on that.
I just wanted to add for Terry, he talked a lot about support staff. I wouldn't want anybody to think that it's just support staff in schools and teachers sitting at home delivering remote education. There's a real mix of what schools are delivering. Some teachers are at home delivering remote education, but there's an awful lot of teachers in school, either working with those children that are key workers or vulnerables, or actually in school delivering remote education, both to those pupils in school and to those pupils at home. So there are different models going on. And actually, sometimes support staff are at home, but contributing to remote education through feedback as well, marking work, as I say, one-to-ones, interventions, support programs as well. So I just wanted to add that into your question.
Yeah, thank you, Debbie. I mean, I think the point the figures that we've seen is that we've got twice the amount of support staff in schools. I think it's 2,000 support staff and 1,000 teachers. And I guess the point I'm trying to make is that for lots of teaching staff, where they're advised to go home, obviously they will, but support staff are contracted in a different way, is my understanding. And therefore, if they don't attend school, they won't get paid. So that's my understanding. Forgive me if I'm wrong.
Well, as a head teacher through the first lockdown, that certainly didn't happen.
Okay, and I think we had a conversation in another meeting the other day where we were talking about the fact that that so often it's pragmatism that decides these things, whether who's in school and who isn't. But they're good points and definitely worth considering. And I, for one, well, I could never see how mass testing was going to happen at the beginning of January, and even though we're months on, I still think it, as you quite rightly highlight, Terry, it's going to be a logistical challenge. Let's put it that way, in an optimistic way. But yeah, good point. Okay, Mike, I'll let you go on.
Yeah, well, let's go on to priority 6. So this is around safeguarding, which we made a priority because of the issues we had with 2 schools becoming inadequate because of safeguarding concerns, and then also feedback we had around the completion of the Portsmouth Safeguarding and Early Help Compact Audit, which all schools do every 2 years, and the fact that we were seeing in some of those audits rather generous ratings against those standards. So safeguarding has been a key priority for us. And just to say that in terms of that audit, we had 37 schools completing the audit in 2020. We've got a further 30 due to complete them in 2021, and that means that all our schools, all 61, will be covered, as well as the independent schools, which also take part in that compact audit. And we will be looking at those audits, and where we see odd results, which should have been the UTC, because they rated themselves outstanding against every standard. That should have set a few alarm bells ringing. We will look into those. We've also done a few other things, which I'll just mention briefly. Worth just noting that UTC Portsmouth, which is one of the schools that was rated inadequate because of issues around their safeguarding systems, that has received a lot of support from the local authority, working with the DSL there and the principal. And I'm very grateful to the Portsmouth Safeguarding Children's Partnership team for the support they've provided in terms of training for the UTC staff, and also advice and guidance to support the issues they had to address as a result of the Ofsted inspection. And that included moving to a completely new system for recording safeguarding incidents, something called CPOMs, which many of our schools use, making sure that we've got, in fact, 3 DSLs now, designated safeguarding leads, where there was only 1 before, and then training for staff also. Crucially, they're locked into the systems that we have in Portsmouth. They were reliant on previously Hampshire information, which is nothing wrong with that, but what they lost out on was the access to the wider system within Portsmouth, and a real clear understanding about the thresholds we operate in Portsmouth and the referrals into the MASH. So much better position as a result of the work they've done there, and that follows on from the work they did previously for Corpus Christi, which was the other school which had been rated inadequate. Should also just add that the training and support that is offered to schools across the city through the PSCP team has been a really good uptake, and within the document, I won't go through all of it, you can see all the different types of training that is offered. Again, really well received and good take up. And then the last point, just about the LA Link coordinator role, which we'll pick up later, very well established now in terms of the tracking and monitoring of vulnerable children across our schools. And now that we have those 3 full-time coordinators appointed from October, that system's working really well. So that's it on safeguarding, a very quick summary. Any questions on that particular priority?
Yeah, Terry's got a question.
Yeah, sorry, lots
of
me today. Apologies. So, Mike, what was the rationale between doing the audit over 2 years, and does that leave us in any way exposed to not really knowing what's going on in some of these schools?
I mean, that has always been, we've always had that in place to make sure that schools complete the audit every 2 years. It's a detailed audit across 12 standards with various elements with each of those standards, and we feel that's appropriate, a 2-year timeline. In the past, actually, the issue has been about schools completing it within those 2 years, but actually, we've put a lot of support in place. We've upped the ante a bit, and I think schools recognise that, with some of the recent Ofsted inspections, how important it is that they get this right. Not just for the inspection purposes, but the safeguarding of their children. So we've got now 100% take up. It's done every 2 years, and so I think we're in a pretty good position on that front. Yeah.
Okay, and in terms
I've got no concerns there.
Great. Sorry, in terms of UTC, so currently the judge is inadequate due to safeguarding concerns. I know that Debbie was saying something quite contradictory about staff being in and working as much as they usually would, but there are schools that are doing reduced timetables. There are schools that are doubling up, and therefore teachers will have gained time during this lockdown period. Is there anything that we can do to look at the possibility of using some of that staff in their gained time on safeguarding?
Sorry, I've got an internet problem. I think I just missed that last.
No, I think Terry, can you say your last sentence again? Because I think I missed it as well.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
Something to do with extra time.
Yeah. So if UTC are on a reduced timetable, not know they are, but if they are on a reduced timetable and staff are working from home and not teaching as much as they would normally, is there an opportunity to use some of that gained time to look at some of those safeguarding concerns and the training that we've got there?
Okay. Right. Okay. Well, on the first point, just to let you know that the UTC is operating a full timetable. So it's a full timetable. All teachers are absolutely 100% engaged in that, delivering the remote education. So that just answers that first point. The second one around gained, well, there isn't gained time as such, but what I can say is that the UTC has allocated significant resource and time to deal with the issues that were picked up in the Ofsted inspection, and that includes, rather than just having 1 designated safeguarding lead, to having 3, an appointment of a new pastoral lead at the UTC, a senior a senior person to lead on that work and make sure that that transfer to the new system, CPOMS, was all done correctly, to make sure the training is in place, to make sure that staff completely understand how to report an instance, when to escalate, etc., and when it's appropriate to put a referral into MASH. All of that now is in place, so I think and I have to declare a bit of an interest here because I'm a trustee of the UTC, so I've had a significant involvement in terms of leading that work as well. So yeah, I'm as confident as I can be about UTC in terms of safeguarding.
Judith.
Have you noticed in the last round a particular increase in safeguarding concerns picked up at school due to the pandemic, or has the rise in numbers of children being seen as at risk come from other sources?
I mean, Alison, Jeffrey might want to come in on this one, but I mean, just to say that in terms of the what we have seen is an increase in terms of the identification of vulnerable learners through the tracking and monitoring that we do with our schools, which perhaps isn't surprising given the lockdown and the fact that schools aren't reopening fully until, well, at the very earliest, 8th of March. So that is impacting on the numbers of vulnerable learners that schools are identifying that they're worried about. In terms of safeguarding risks, Alison, if you're on the line, do you want to come in on that one?
Yep, very happy to. Yeah, I mean, we definitely saw an increase in referrals from schools in the autumn, which then we saw the Christmas period where there were fewer, and they rose again when school started, but less so, and so actually it's been plateauing for the last 2 or 3 weeks. We've seen an increase in referrals from the police as well, particularly last summer, actually, from their visits to homes and to their concerns about young people who are out and about. I mean, we're running at the moment at about 130% of usual compared to this time last year and the previous patterns. So we're pretty busy in both social care and early help. The early help service in particular has got the largest number of families that they've worked with ever in their 3-year history, under a lot of pressure. So yeah, there's a whole range of issues which families are affected by: mental health issues, substance misuse, domestic violence, the usual. In fact, domestic violence has stayed about the same proportion of cases as it's always been, around 30% or so. So yeah, just overall increased pressure and a changing pattern of referrals from schools, with the big rise being in the autumn.
Thanks, Alison. Any other questions on safeguarding? No? Okay, in which case I'll move on to priority 7, which is around emotional health and well-being. And you won't be surprised to see that as being a significant priority for us, given the impact of the pandemic. But I'm going to stop talking. I'm just going to hand over to Sarah just to say a few words, pick out a few highlights from that particular priority in terms of progress this year.
Thank you, Mike. As you said, this has been a priority for years, but it's become even more to the front over the last 6 to 8 months or so. As you know, we have mental health support teams in Portsmouth and much wider coverage than other areas of the country, which is fantastic. The 3rd team has just been recruited, so they start their training. Obviously, it's a year-long training programme, and the training for the existing teams has been impacted by having to move to remote learning for them, as well as the ability to have training cases. However, the other 2 teams are up and running, and their offer is remote and is available to the schools there. We have, in response to some of the feedback from schools, we've recruited additional posts within the mental health support teams with a focus particularly on behavioural needs, because that's one of the things that schools are still struggling with, where children are, their behaviour is causing the concern, but they don't actually have a mental illness of any sort, but it is obviously quite distressing for them and for their peers. So we've recruited additional people into the teams there. We are obviously expecting, well, not obviously, but we are expecting that there may be some impact, more concerns when children come back to school. All of the specialist services are still receiving referrals at the moment, but schools are obviously not necessarily seeing all of the children. So we've got workshops planned, one for primary, one for secondary, to think about how we best use the mental health support teams and how we support children and families as they come back in. So the secondary workshop is this week and the primary one straight after half term. Something else that we're looking to do, a piece of work, is starting actually mapping out all of the different pathways in the mental health spectrum. So some of the ways that we think things should work, but also what does that look like in reality for children and for families? Because even though we've hugely expanded our offer and we're in a much stronger place than we were, there are still some children and some families that fall through the net. So we want to get a really good idea of where those gaps are so that we can make sure that we plug them rather than just putting more stuff in the same place. You may have also seen we have now commissioned and launched Cooth, which is an online counselling service that is available. The actual counselling is available for a number of hours every day, 365 days a year, and the online support is obviously 24/7. It is confidential, but they have really secure safeguarding mechanisms in place so that they can be aware of any concerns and follow those up. So in the very early days, we have already got quite a number of young people who have signed up for that, and that should help to capture them at an earlier stage. And it's also there's peer support models on there. It's a great resource on there, and we're working on promoting that and making sure that it's widely available, and that's obviously free and available to all of our young people from 11 up to 25 with SEND or 18 without. And then the other area of work has been looking at the work that the government put around wellbeing for education return, which was initially focused from the government's perspective on training all school staff to support young people with their mental health. But actually, what we've looked at, having been doing some of that work, is we've refocused that to focus on the staff, because actually if the staff themselves are not feeling healthy, then they are not in a position to be able to support the children and young people. So all the strategies and things that we're talking about are things that they absolutely can use with children as well, but we're trying to make sure that staff take some time to look after themselves in order that they are better equipped to look after the children. And particularly, we've invested quite a lot in supporting our senior leaders and particularly our heads, because of the pressure on them at the moment and the way that they are having to focus on looking after good responses and good uptake to those different parts of that offer. I think that's it from me. So if there's any questions or comments on that.
Thank you, Sarah, for that outline. And I think I really like the point that you make about actually looking at mapping this and working out what does it look like from I think the technical term would be a user end as opposed to our strategic thing. And just to say on the Cooth, I went on the Cooth webinar, which was available to staff, and I hopped on just to try and understand it a bit more. And one of the things that I really, really liked about it was the focus on well-being, rather than just you only go to this if you have a problem, but actually if you want to carry on investing in your own health in the broadest sense. There was a lot on there. I was quite taken by it and thought a younger version of myself would have been quite enjoyed the range of support and also activities and groups on there. So it's definitely worthwhile one to keep spreading the word. So that was great. Jeanette, I'll come to you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm a bit of a worrier, and my worry is that school staff across the board, including senior leaders, are at such a low ebb. For me, feel that they're lacking confidence as well. So I applaud all the things that are in place, but I think it's going to need more. What more can we sort of do to try and aid that? And it's the post-pandemic period of time that I think, because everybody's geared up at the moment, and I think there's going to be a huge slump. And it's how do we catch people when they slump like that?
I'm really welcome to any ideas and suggestions. So, if people are hearing things from staff about what they want, a lot of the things that we've got out there, so the sessions for staff wellbeing are aimed at all staff, support staff as much as teachers. They are being recorded as well, so they are available to revisit at any time. And we've also got some resources that schools can use. And I know a number of schools have used some of those recorded sessions as a whole staff training. So they've given people directed time to access those resources. And I would encourage them to revisit some of those things alongside that. I think it's something that we are very much aware of, and we're hearing feedback from head teachers about how their staff are managing and then looking to put things in place at the moment. We did ask heads last week whether they felt there was anything further they needed in terms of the wellbeing support offer at the moment, and they felt that it was okay at the moment. But I think you're absolutely right, Jeanette, that as people come back, the pressure will be there. One of the things that the mental health support teams are also able to do is that whole school approach and that work with staff and that consultation with staff. So if staff are worried, then of course they can offload there in terms of children. But we do know that all of our schools, I'm pretty sure all of them have some sort of employee assistance program, and making sure that people are aware of that and the way that they can access confidential support through those programs as well as individuals if it's not a whole school thing.
Yeah. It's the surrounding of PTSD that I'm concerned about, and that's more of an individual than sort of group work.
Exactly.
But I'm really pleased that employee assistance programs are in place, and I think we just need to monitor it very carefully, which I know we will anyway. So that's fine.
Thank you for that. Mike, do you want to carry on?
Yeah, okay, so we'll go into the next priority, which is around attendance. And just to say, and I think we reported this earlier, we've obviously dropped the sort of miss school, miss out campaign, which we were running last year. It's still there in the background, and we're going to come back to it, we think, at some point. But at the moment, obviously, that hasn't been appropriate. So what we've done this year is we started in the autumn term with the Welcome Back to School campaign, which was well received. And for those pupils that were struggling to come back for a variety of issues, we worked with our schools on welcome back plans, which are sort of plans for a short period, up to 6 weeks, supported by our LA Link coordinators and the wider teams. That's worked well. And of course, through our LA Link coordinators, we've been identifying those vulnerable learners, which we've RAG rated. Well, I say got an extra rating of P, which is for purple, for those we're particularly concerned with. So around about 3,000 children, vulnerable learners that we've been tracking and monitoring. And then this term, it's been very much around ready to learn and supporting remote education. So we've had lots of messages going out in terms of top tips for learning on our web pages, PCC, which we've given schools access to, and they've sent those out to parents. And we've had a lot of work around our social media as well. So a lot of work with our comms to put out those key messages. And the only other thing I was going to highlight was around the elective home education issue. So we did see in the autumn a small spike in the numbers of children that were being deregistered on the grounds of being electively home educated. These are about parents who are particularly very anxious about going back to school and we're trying to go for that particular option. Obviously, we implemented the protocol, had that three-way meeting where parents were making that decision, and our numbers compared to other local authority numbers are very small, actually. I mean, we saw a spike. I think it went with an extra 23, 24. I think it was something of that order. So a small increase, but in other local authority areas, we saw very significant increases. That has now tailed off, and it's pretty much down to zero now, but we may well see another spike as schools start to fully reopen again. I don't think it's going to be a big one in Portsmouth, but I know other local authorities are very concerned about larger spikes occurring. So just to mention that also.
Thank you, Mike.
Any questions on that? Yeah.
Terry.
Yep, thank you. If you don't mind, Mike, my question is around attendance during lockdown. So I guess it's key worker school again, if you don't mind. And I think it's worth getting it on record. So Portsmouth's numbers are higher than the national average at the moment. So is there any evidence that parents are using key worker school unnecessarily, if they're not key workers. If so, what checks, or if any, are we doing to ensure that children really do need or require that access? And has, in any situation, can we confirm that no child of a key worker has been denied a place? And I think what I'm trying to get at is I don't want a lack of consistency where somebody, you know, in Frank's ward could have a place in school, and a school 200 yards down the road are being told they're at capacity or what have you, because it's a system that's not been thoroughly checked, I guess. So just so that every parent in Portsmouth has consistency.
Okay, I mean I'm going to struggle to give you an answer to those questions because there is so much variation. So in terms of that need for consistency, what I can say is that they are consistently applying the criteria, but of course they are subject to capacity and how they manage risk of transmission. So we have some schools. I'll just take one example, the Court Lane schools in the north of the city, where we've got high numbers of critical workers because of the proximity of Queen Alexandra Hospital, for example, and they are really stretched. They are almost 50% full. Whereas we got other schools in the city which are not stretched in that way. So to give you that consistency is going to be quite difficult. What I can say is they do apply the criteria, so they are quite rigorous about how they apply it in terms of critical worker status, and they will test that out and make sure that those critical workers that need those places are given those places as far as they're able to. Sometimes they are having to prioritise because they are limited by space, but that's few and far between. In most cases, they can give those places. So I would say there's consistency in terms of the way they're adhering to the principles, but I can't give you consistency in terms of offering those places because it is subject to the situation in each school. So that was the answer to the last question. What was your first question? Sorry, Terry.
No, I think it was just tying in around making sure that we had some consistency across the city, so there were no families that were unfairly penalised because where they live.
Yeah. I mean, going back to your first point about we are above average for attendance on site. I think we're at 17 to 19%. The average is around 50% across the country. Of probably greater concern is the fact if you look at our children who are on EHCPs or have a social worker, we're slightly below the national average, which is a concern, absolutely. And we are challenging our schools around making sure that we're doing as much as we can to offer places to our vulnerable learners.
Alison wants to add something, I think.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add to what Mike has said about consistency, I think our issue is really that we're not resourced as a local authority to oversee the admissions process for key worker children. So we can try and give guidance about the application of the principles that are set out in the government's guidance. Although that guidance is very wide, we can and do encourage discussion between schools in our regular meetings with them about how they're applying it. But we couldn't possibly oversee the decisions by individual schools around individual parents. So it's actually not possible for us to say that there is complete consistency, and that we wouldn't be able to oversee that or to check the evidence or to have any process for checking their employment status or anything like that. And we can't either guarantee that there are no bona fide key workers who've been told that they can't have a place, because equally we can't supervise the decisions that schools have made to not to offer a place. What we have said to all the partners involved in the public service effort around the pandemic is that if they encounter any problems in accessing school places for their children, we are absolutely at their disposal to take issues up with individual schools. And we've had very few of those. And that availability of our good offices, if you like, has been very clearly signalled through the local resilience forum at the highest level to the NHS. They've had the directors' email addresses for all 4 upper tier local authorities so that everybody knows exactly what to do. We've had very, very few. So it's just it's got to be, I think, run at individual school level, which means we can't quite give the copper bottom guarantees that you're looking for, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful, and I'm sure you can appreciate that as counsellors, we get a lot of what we get is word of mouth and hearsay, so it's important to have that on record so that we can go back and clarify that to any residents. Thank you.
Yeah,
good point. It's a misunderstanding of what the role of the local education authority is nowadays. I get this all the time. So I completely appreciate what you're saying. Mike, I think you're on to the last priority.
I am. So priority 9 is around sufficiency and the school buildings to support this. So we had a number of actions set out for year 1, and we are absolutely on track to deliver these. So just briefly run through them. So the secondary sufficiency schemes that we needed to complete by September 2020, they were all done. That was Admiral Lord Nelson School, Charter Academy, the Portsmouth Academy, St Edmunds and Trafalgar School. So all of those works were completed, enabling us to deliver those places from September. We also completed building works at Redwood Park Academy and Cliffdale Primary Academy, where we needed additional school places in our special schools for September. That was done. But crucially, and I think probably the most significant piece of work was the SEND and alternative provision accommodation review, a sort of second phase of work. We completed that last term, and that basically sets out our 5-year strategy for special school places, whether those are in our special schools or also places within our mainstream schools, particularly in terms of inclusion centres. And we now have a 5-year strategy, and on the back of that, we submitted a bid to members for some capital funding, and I'm hopeful that at full council tomorrow that will be given seal of approval. So and we have the first few schemes within that strategy looking to go ahead this year, ready for September. So, and again, I can give you more details if you wish, but yeah, all on track. Worth also just noting that the building of the new special free school in Wimmering, which is a special free school for autism, particularly for those children with the most challenging behaviour, that is on track. The planning application is in and has been considered by officers as we speak, and we're hopeful that will all be ready for September 2022. And then just a few other things to mention. At Cliffdale Primary, we're looking to do some expansion work there, and that's partly subject to relocating what is the Battenberg Family Contact Centre in Children's Social Care to a new location, and we're working on that, and we have plans are well in place to support that relocation, so we can use that site to support the expansion of Cliffdale. And then finally, the rebuild of Mayfield School is on track and is due to complete later this year in July 2021, ready for September. So again, positive news there. I'll pause there and happy to take any questions on priority 9.
Nothing in the chat.
I was just going to say, well done. That sounds as a terrific achievement during COVID. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's fine. I completely endorse that. It's the only I think meeting that Mike and I have had the entire year in person was when we went on was between the lockdowns, where we went and visited those schemes during the summer, and I'm absolutely amazed that they managed to pull that off. So it was
and certainly, and credit to the officer that managed that work, Chris Williams. I agree. It's been a fantastic effort, and despite all the issues around supplies of building materials and so forth, they've then managed to pull it off. So yeah, really good. Right, I am conscious of time, and I was going to briefly take you through 3 cross-cutting themes, which also run through the strategy. But I think, Susie, we're going to run out of time if I do that, and then go on to the other 2 reports. But just to say that we have 3 cross-cutting themes that go across all of our priorities. One is around inclusion, and we set out in the report a number of areas we've progressed on for inclusion. Another is around Black Lives Matters, which we included, and then also the early years sector as well. And again, as you'll see from the report, we've made really good progress across all 3 themes. But again, I'm happy to take any questions now, but if I did go through the detail, I think we're just going to run out of time.
Okay. I think we've got Terry and Judith both want to come in on that. I can't remember. Hang on. Who's going to go first? I can't remember.
Go first. I think Judith's hand popped up first, so let Judith go first.
I just wanted to ask about monitoring ethnicity in education, which has not been done nationally very well, and I wondered if we're able to find our way around that here. ethnicity against achievement, for example.
Oh,
Yeah, we do monitor that, and obviously we haven't had the benefit of any sort of results where we can do that recently. But yes, we do. So and we have the benefit of the Ethnic Minority Achievement Service run by Karen Thomas, and one of the pieces of work the data team do for Karen is to look at achievement for EAL pupils, and what we do find actually in Portsmouth is our pupils who have English as an additional language do better than their peers. So we have really, really good results here in Portsmouth, which is encouraging. I think that's partly because of the investment we put in through EMAS, which schools pay for, I have to
That's
say.
been going on for quite a long time, Mike.
It has, yeah.
I remember that when I worked in education.
Absolutely, it's been here for a long time. Really well respected service. So for those children who are coming into the system in their early years, where English is a difficulty, we have the bilingual learning support assistants who are providing that support, interpretation, and of course within a few years they're speaking pretty good English, much better than their parents, and they do exceptionally well, with obviously very good parental support involved as well. So we have good outcomes, but we do track that every year. Obviously we haven't been able to do that recently, but yeah, we're on to that.
And are we able to monitor things like special education needs delegation identification? I will never forget that one of my son's best friends at Priory many moons ago now was identified as having special learning difficulties at 11 when he went to Priory, and he's a vascular surgeon now with some growing national reputation.
Well, I think that's getting better and better, Judith, across all our schools. Our mainstream schools now are incredibly inclusive. They provide that support, and we've got much better identification of needs. So I think we're in a much better position than we were many years ago. I can't give you specific details, but yeah, I think it's
we need to watch out for that sort of thing, because it was even then at the time it seemed to me extraordinary as
and of course
the child.
and I'd include just looking at autism, for example, the way we diagnose that and the work we've been doing on neurodevelopment pathways. It's been spectacular, really, some of the work we've been doing there with our schools, with the support of the education psychologist service.
Thank you. Terry.
Yeah, thank you. So it's just in terms of that group, really, just making sure that we are still working with various anti-racism groups such as Kick It Out and things. It's they are inclusive in our BLM pushes, aren't they? They're not replacing those groups, I hope.
No, I mean, I might bring in Sarah, actually, because Sarah's been doing quite a lot of work with our schools around this, and also staff within the City Council as well. Sarah, do you want to come in on the network we've established?
Yes, it's absolutely building on the existing work, but given the higher profile and the conversations that are happening, it's a great platform to build on. One thing we're really looking to push on the 21st of March, it's UN Anti-Racism Day, or International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. So we're asking all schools to get involved in that, and we're getting some resources together that will be shared with schools. So we ran it by heads last week, and we're hopefully going to get some children, young people, to design a slogan that says Portsmouth against racism, one city, many cultures. So building on the stuff that's already there, but using that increased interest, and actually young people themselves becoming more active in anti-racist work.
Yeah, great.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah.
That's really, really welcoming, and a slightly political point, forgive me, but I mean, it is really reassuring that you're collecting the resources and asking heads. There are stories, I think, sometimes of teachers being asked to go and create resources which sometimes have a political sway in them, or becomes more about the politics rather than the message. So great that I think those resources are being coordinated and that heads are overseeing what's being delivered in classrooms. Thank you.
It's probably worth just jumping in and say, in terms of the cross-cutting theme, is I had my governor's hat on at the virtual governors meet-up the other day, and this came up as in a very organic way, and I think actually that's exactly what the whole idea of the cross-cutting theme is, that it just is not a project-based thing, that it's actually throughout everything that we do. So there's some really great work going on, and I learned something. I swear I will learn something every week. I just like another thing, and I'm learning lots from Sarah as well. So yeah, thanks for that. Any other questions on the other cross-cutting themes before we go to the next report? So I mean, that was really, really, really thorough, but I think it's really good to be able to go into depth with these key issues. So the next item, thank you, Mike. I think we're coming back to you. Some of this has probably been covered. I think,
this will be quite brief actually, because we have covered a lot of this. So just by way of an introduction, so the report you've got in front of you is actually building on the report we gave you last term. So the sections I want to just briefly focus on are sections 5, which is about the ongoing support during the autumn term since we last spoke to you back in October, and then section 6, which is obviously the response to the third national lockdown and closure of schools from the 4th of January. And as I go through this, I'll just pick up those areas which I haven't picked up in the last report. So this probably won't take me more than about 5 to 10 minutes as we go through that. Is that okay as an introduction? So if we just move to section 5 then. So ongoing support during the autumn term. So
I think it's section 6 on our report.
Oh, is it section 6?
Have I got that wrong? Is it just me?
It could be. I'm looking at a version I prepared probably just before it was published. So this is about ongoing support during the autumn term. Is that the title of it?
Yeah, okay. That's what I've got.
Fine. Okay. So so very briefly, and I say I'm not going to spend too much time on the work I've already talked about. So the tracking and monitoring vulnerable children I've covered. The support we've given on remote education and emotional health and well-being I've covered. So all of that section really we've covered in the update we gave against the education strategy. In terms of the next section, which is the response since the third national lockdown and the closure of schools from the 4th of January, we've talked already about attendance and the arrangements we put in place to support that, particularly around vulnerable learning. I've talked a bit more about the remote education offer and the work of TSAT and how we've supported access to devices. And we've also covered the testing regime that we've had in place in terms of lateral flow testing and vaccinations. What I haven't talked too much about is free school meals, so we'll just pick up on that. And also we haven't covered some of the work we've been doing with our Year 11s to ensure that they have a positive post-16 destination. So in terms of free school meals, you will be probably aware, I'm sure you are, that over Christmas we put in place a voucher scheme covered through the winter COVID grant money that we received from government, and that was successfully done through Edenred, which is the national voucher scheme which the government have supported over the summer, and we're doing the same again for this half term. So although the government have come out and have supported vouchers for this term, which was obviously a welcome piece of news for our families, we've made sure that over half term we've also got that voucher scheme in place, again funded through the winter COVID grant, and again through the same provider, Edenred. So although there is a slightly different way of doing it, schools are very familiar with this, and so are families, so we're hoping that will go fairly smoothly. And then the other thing to mention was around our support for Year 11s. So we recognise that this is a particularly challenging year for our Year 11s, and it's interesting to note that the applications into our post-16 providers are down this year. So we're doing some additional work to support our Year 11s through the Flying Start programme that we set up last year, which is a website giving access to information about our post-16 offer and our providers in the travel to learn area. And we're going to back that up with some webinars for parents and carers to support progression into post-16. And on top of that, as we would normally do, we're identifying with our schools those young people who we are concerned about in terms of a post-16 destination, and through the Youth Need Prevention Programme, which is supported by secondary schools and colleges, it's a traded service that we offer. We are providing dedicated support for those young people through our careers and progression advisors, and that is all up and running this year. It's made it more challenging because of the pandemic and how we work with those young people. Some of it's done virtually. There is some face-to-face, but it's quite limited. But that seems to be working well. So, I just wanted to touch on that also. But otherwise, in terms of this report, it's all been covered in the first report. So I hope that gives you a fairly good summary of our response to the pandemic and how we supported our schools.
Any comments, questions? Judith, you got your hand up. Is that a legacy hand? Yeah, looks like by your reaction. Okay, that's great. So we'll move. Thank you for that report. And we will move then on to item 5, which is where am I now? We're item 6. No, reopening. Okay, item 6, which is support and challenge for local authority maintained schools. Are you presenting this, Mike?
No, I'm gonna
Debbie?
hand over. You've probably heard enough from me, so I'm gonna hand over to Debbie, who's going to take you through this report.
There you go, Debbie.
Okay, thank you. So this report sets out how LA maintained schools in particular have been provided with support and challenge by the School Improvement Service in this academic year to date. It builds on the report that I provided last time, which talked about how to prioritise our LA maintained schools with the resources that we have. So obviously the support that we give is proportional to need. So I've outlined that more support has been given particularly to our 2 schools that have less than good Ofsted judgments for their overall effectiveness. And obviously through the autumn term, I was able to do some in-school risk assessed visits, but also quite frequent contact with those 2 particular schools, looking at plans, working with the head teachers, putting in support or commissioning support. Both of those 2 schools in the autumn term had Ofsted monitoring visits. They were quite focused on safeguarding and vulnerable children and how the return to school had gone in September. If you read the reports, they're very bland, very sort of generic statements, and they don't talk hugely about the evidence that was gathered. Subsequently, Corpus Christi, who currently have an inadequate judgment, have had a recent Ofsted monitoring inspection visit as well. And I was actually interviewed by the lead inspector in HMI as part of that inspection, and the official report will be published for that one. But I have worked very closely with that particular head teacher, who was also new in post in September. So you can see how that support was needed. I've also been successful since September about securing some particular support for 2 of our schools. National Leaders of Education are head teachers of outstanding schools in their own right, but also do work, school-to-school support work with other schools. So I was able to successfully commission or bid for 2 of those to work with 2 schools in particular. It was 5 days of work that should be done, which was classed as recovering from COVID. It wasn't necessarily just COVID focused, but particularly then plans in place moving forward from how the schools came back in September. And that was targeted at 2 local authority maintained schools in particular. Obviously, it's really important to continue to commission external support, and I've been pleased to be able to commission some of that. So that's provided continuity for some of those schools moving forward, as well as myself working with some of our schools. In the risk assessed visits that I managed to do in the autumn term, 2 of those in particular were to a school where there was a new head teacher in post from September, not necessarily new to headship, but new to our local authority. So sometimes a new head teacher with fresh eyes, it's quite useful to work with them because they're moving things on at a pace. So to have somebody not just themselves saying it to their staff, the messages that they want to get across, and to quality assure their judgments has been useful. So that was very supportive, but also to provide the extra additional challenge to a new head teacher as well, moving forward. It's important to keep looking at what children produce. So working with our local lead moderator and other subject specialists, that's been looking at particular pieces of work that children do, making sure there are accurate judgments and looking at next steps in learning. And that's another way to support our teachers and leaders, but also to challenge the accuracy of judgments about what children are achieving. Moving on, sometimes looking at school plans, particularly school improvement plans and strategic plans, isn't just looking at the processes, and it's important, and I've certainly provided some challenge back to our schools that actually it's all very well laying out in a plan what actions you're taking, but actually we want to focus on the outcomes of those plans. So I certainly went back to a couple of schools and said, okay, tell us about what the impact for that could be, and particularly looking at the outcomes. Obviously, we've talked about plans and remote education a great deal through the pandemic. And I did actually go through every single one of our 21 LA maintained schools and look at the remote education information for parents that they were had to publish in meeting those DFE expectations, and provided feedback to those, which is just as well, because it's now since Friday become from the 12th of February a legal duty to publish that information for parents. So I think having the challenge for our schools, and I'm providing that feedback to every single one of those schools, has been useful, and they're now in a secure place where they don't need to worry, oh, I now need to get that plan in place and have that detail for the 12th of February, because that piece of work has already been done. Talking about remote education, obviously immense progress has been made, but I think the whole sort of live debate about whether they're live lessons or recorded lessons isn't necessarily the issue. The important part of the expectations from the DFE has been about interactivity. We talked about earlier that relationship that teachers and other members of staff have with their pupils is sometimes just as important as the learning and lessons that are being delivered. So that's been part of ensuring that actually that interactivity is social, maintaining those relationships, but also providing feedback on, yes, you might have sat in on that lesson, you might have submitted that piece of work, but actually the feedback I'm going to give you now about that is about moving learning forwards. So we talked about the destination reader and the 10 schools that are particularly on that project. We titled it Reading for Purpose and Pleasure, because I think both aspects of that development of reading are really important. But I think what the programme brings from Hackney Learning Trust is a real systematic sequencing of specific reading skills. And I think without that subject-specific knowledge, reading is quite complex to teach. So I think that is really going to help and move forward those 10 particular schools. And moving forward, I'm going to be able to ensure that they buy into the annual subscription, taking it forward into next year, because the resources get updated, the support gets updated from Hackney Learning Trust. And we're going to have a network of that group of 10 schools of the teachers that are actually implementing that reading in the classrooms and remotely, to work collaboratively together. What's going well? What are they finding from it? So it's another way to both support and challenge. I have presented to the LA maintained schools, particularly about an organisation called Pixel. I've put that in the report. It's not necessarily reinventing the wheel, but again, it's providing assessment, but also providing what do you do from when you assess children. There's question level analysis. There are results and resources, as opposed to, oh, we'll just test the children and leave it at that. That's where they are. We need to know what we need to do next about what we find out. So I presented that, and I know one of our LA maintained schools has particularly bought into that organisation as a result. Talked about assessment constantly. Obviously, we're not going to have assessment this year in the way that we've had it, like we didn't last year. So I have spoken to our lead moderator, and instead we've repurposed those training sessions and moderation sessions to make sure that actually we can still talk to teachers about judging pupils' work, judging where they are, making accurate assessments, and then thinking about how the transition points for how that's going to impact for year 2 moving to year 3 in September, year 6 to year 7 in particular. So that piece of work will hopefully support schools through that process, wherever we are with children coming back to school. Also worked particularly, as I've said, with our new head teachers into post. And that's part of the work that Sarah and I did, to be able to commission a coaching external consultant to work with 5 new heads who are in post, new to headship, so that they have some coaching sessions, particularly because I think, working through the pandemic has been hard enough if you're an experienced head teacher, but if you're new to headship as well, it's certainly presenting lots of challenge. So there's a coach working with them, and then that network group will continue. I'll work with them as well, but also they will be a very supportive group working with each other. So obviously, I think, as I say, being a head teacher is hard enough. Being a head teacher with the shifting sands, the challenges, the constant changing of advice, guidance, the next bit coming in, it has been a really difficult time. But I think actually our LA maintained schools have worked together, and particularly we're working closer, I think, with the MATs in moving everything forward. So lots done in 5 months.
Thank you, Debbie, for that. That's a really, really good report. And I guess the whole balance is being sympathetic to these extraordinary times and understanding what teachers are going through, whilst also realising it still is the only journey that a child has through their learning years, and therefore, you know, we mustn't become complacent about that. And it is that delicate balance. So thank you for all the work that you've done on that. It's really impressive. Terry.
Yeah, thank you, Susie, and thank you, Debbie. It is really reassuring to know that you know, you are working with schools and looking at the remote education side of it's interesting to say that you said teachers not just giving video resources, but being there for that one-to-one interaction. You know, I've had lots and lots of stories, and I'm ashamed to say that actually across the city, it's not the case that all teachers are working as hard as they normally would or more. There are lots of stories of you know, parents saying, well, my child hasn't had their regular teacher, they see them once a week, they can't get one-to-one feedback in the same way as they normally would, or, you know, there are teachers putting on videos and leaving it there. So that ability for children to be able to have that access and that one-to-one is really, really important. You know, it's not the same place across the city in terms of the reports I'm hearing, but it is important, I think, that you've raised it and are looking into it. So yeah, really appreciate that. Thank you.
I think as well, when you need to appreciate sometimes, I mean, obviously there's Oak National Academy and other sites that have pre-recorded sessions, but I have heard about some teachers putting considerable amounts of time into pre-recorded sessions as well to get them just right and just what they want for their pupils. I think it has been quite demanding.
Yeah, and I think it's always the case that you don't hear of the positives, you hear of the negatives, but it's not to say that we've not had reports and casework where, you know, parents are complaining about schools who are saying, right, there's your work, off you go, and there's no teachers to support you for the next hour. So unfortunately not consistent across the whole of the city, but I guess it's something for individual schools to challenge.
I mean, what I would say is that we had an annual conversation just last week with Ofsted, where the Secretary of State had quite clearly said about remote education that parents, if they weren't happy with it, should go to the school first. And then if they still weren't happy with it, to go to Ofsted. And the Ofsted team were happy to report back to us that for Portsmouth as a local authority, they had had 1 complaint and 40 positive communications.
Good. Yeah, that's good, reassuring.
Loads of positive feedback. Also, I mean, I think it's probably a statement at the obvious, but if people do get individual complaints going to them, then we can broker really sensible conversations. The couple that I've had have actually, it's not been, you know, once the opportunity has been there to actually unpack it, there's been a really positive outcome for, you know, for the family and the learner and the school. And schools are really keen to know about this, because sometimes this stuff gets written, you know, either on social media or through angry emails or whatever. And I can't think of a case where we haven't managed to get to a positive solution, so that's really good. However, we are not complacent.
I think where we were 11 months ago during the first lockdown, we are actually light years away with what is being delivered and the education that is being provided for our pupils.
And I think it's worth stating as well, it's really welcome that the officers are helping schools with promoting attendance and writing to parents and saying, look, there is a real need to be online. So that's a, you know, really good piece of work from officers, I think.
Yeah. Thank you. Was it Jeanette or Judith? Did you wave at one point? Oh, Jeanette, you've got right. Sorry, you've put it in the chat. Sorry.
Yeah, thumbs up. That's all from me.
Just a sort of comment. It was a very good report, and I think it shows the amount of hard work that's been put in, not just by officers of the local authority, but also from schools and all school staff. And actually, the one thing I've learnt through lockdown is to think of the positives. and we'll concentrate on the positives, and the negatives will look after their own, to be honest. So I think it's a well done to everybody for what they've done.
Thank you. And I'm sure our schools will be pleased to hear that back. In fact, what we've just done on Friday is ask every school to send us in one positive quote about remote education that's either come from a pupil, a parent, or a member of staff, so that potentially we could use those in a celebratory way.
Thank you. That's a lovely idea. And I believe that the news were asking for comments online the other day, and I quit when I only saw positive ones, put it that way. So that was very positive. That was a good thing too. So as an education advisory board, we collectively have to note these reports. So we've gone through 3 reports: the education strategy update, the response to the reopening of schools, the additional bits on that, and lastly the support and challenge for LA maintained schools. So I'm assuming that we all note those, and I'd like to play, and I'm sure I'm representing the other members here, we would like to place on record our thanks to the officers for writing such full reports, but also, as Councillor Smith very eloquently summarised, all the people who make those successes possible, the teachers, and also the families who are really engaging with remote learning and in such a positive way, and under really difficult circumstances for a lot of people. Let's put it this way: the pandemic has not been an experience of equality, and people are dealing with really difficult personal things. So thank you to everyone. I believe the last item is the date of the next meeting, which is the 14th of July. Who knows where we'll be at then? I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk about, though, and I'm sure there'll be lots of stuff to do in between. So thank you, everyone. Unless there's any other comments, I can't see anything else.
Yeah, Susie, I will make a point if that's okay. Sorry to jump in at the end again. I mean, I do want to make just to quickly highlight Councillor Smith's issue, and I don't want to say, forgive me if it feels like I'm being over scrutinising, but my understanding is that the main part of this group is to scrutinise. So forgive if there are negative elements there, but I do think that's the purpose of this board. So thank you. Forgive me if I've overspoken today.
Okay. I'm not too sure what that was about, but do you want to say anything? Do you want to, Councillor Smith, do you want to come back, or should we leave it there?
I'll leave it there. That'd be fine.
Yeah. Okay.
Can I just come in, Susie?
Yes,
just say,
please, Mike.
Absolutely, I completely agree with what Terry said there. This is about scrutiny of the work we do to support our schools, particularly our LA maintained schools. So we welcome that challenge, so don't be afraid, Terry, to ask those difficult questions. You need to do that. So just to say, we've got no issue with that at all.
Okay, excellent. Right, on that note, we shall say goodbye. Thank you, everyone, for your contributions to the meeting. Thank you.
Jeanette.
Thank you.
Bye, Terry.
Bye.
Bye,
I'll
Susie.
end the live
Goodbye.
stream. You're still audible for a couple of minutes.
Okay, thank you, Anna.
See everyone tomorrow.
Yes, excitement.
Well, it should be shorter because there's no motions.
There's no motion.
Questions.
And even if everyone speaks, I think it should be. Well, it depends on the length of the speeches of the